It's always a great pleasure for me to bring Hank Landsberg to us. Hank is the mental genius behind Henry Engineering, the Matchbox, and so many other things. And so today I thought it would be interesting if we could talk about one or two of the products that Hank has put together to make things simpler. The Matchbox being perhaps the most common one that you may have seen or thought of, that you would think, well, it's so simple. You go from unbalanced to balanced. And yet, in many a station, with, I mean, it was kind of a hassle to make those things happen all by yourself. And then there's this box that does it. Is that how you came up with the idea in the first place, Hank?
Yeah, it goes back to my ancient days at Drake Chanel, where we had an awful lot of consumer stereo gear in the studios back when the company was just kind of getting started. I guess they didn't have enough, budget to go out and blow a lot of money on pro gear everywhere. So when I got there in let's see, 74, uh, the studios were sort of cobbled together with various equipment that came out of Fresno, out of KYNO, which was the station that Gene Chenal owned up there. So there was some pro stuff that came out of that station, but then as the company grew and needed more studios and whatnot, they were often built out of, you know, I would call semi-pro stuff from TIAC and Sony and whatnot. And of course, all that stuff is unbalanced, but the consoles were balanced +4. And of course, nothing would work. So I ended up, having to homebrew dozens of these things. And that's when it occurred to me, well, I'll bet you there's a bunch of other people that are kind of in the same boat. Because everybody was using cassette decks and that sort of stuff. A lot of times, especially in smaller stations, if they didn't have some extra money, they would, go to the local Radio Shack store and do a trade out or something and give them a handful of ads for a few cassette decks or whatever they needed. So anyway, that's kind of where it came from. Um, and last time I checked, I think the total number of matchboxes I've I've shipped, it's somewhere between 65 and 70,000.
Oh my goodness.
There's a boatload of them out there.
Wow.
Um, we don't sell very many of them anymore because, there's not a whole lot of analog studio building going on. Plus, whenever a station converts everything to digital, they start digging into the bowels of their studio and they probably come up with 15 or 20 of those things that have been, buried in the bottom of the rack somewhere. And um, I'm sure some of them get tossed into the dumpster, but probably a handful of them get thrown in a box and put in a storage closet. So the next time they need one, they just, pull one out of the box. So anyway, so that's where that started. And then about, let's see, in about 20, let me think here, 28 or 9, something like that. Um, I sort of adapted that idea to a USB environment, and that's where the the USB Matchbox came from. So that's what I'll talk about first. This is not a new product. You've probably seen these things. I think you can see it up
Yep.
there. Okay. You've probably seen these things. They've been around. The original one, um, I think, is about 2007 or 8, something like that. And they were built around a really high performance Burr Brown USB DAC chip, DAC plus ADC, um, that lent itself really well. But of course, the audio in and out to it was unbalanced, low level, because it was really intended for high-end consumer audiophile gear. So basically, I just took that chip and wrapped a matchbox around it to do the conversion to +4 balanced, and that's where we get this. Um, and the back looks pretty familiar. I think you can see that.
Hmm.
Analog in and out on XLRs, the usual thing. And over here in the corner below the power cord is the USB connector to the computer. But thankfully, that Burr Brown chip also has a SPDIF output. And as it turns out, you can take a SPDIF output and run it through what is essentially just a really wideband analog amplifier. In this case, I used what was intended to be a video, an analog video driver op amp. And you can just bring that up, just treat it like an analog signal, bring it up to AES standard, balanced, put a transformer on the output, and you've got a very legitimate AES output. So that's one of the reasons this thing is kept selling. It's because it's got analog in and out plus AES out, and it always works. SPDIF may or may not have copy code data. And in the case of interfacing with other SPDIF gear, which is consumer digital interface, where are you going to go? Okay. That whole copy code thing gets into the act to prevent unauthorized copying and all that kind of thing. But even if the SPDIF output has copy code data, it will be included in that AES output. But AES equipment ignores it. Even if it's there, they don't care. So it's not an issue. So it always works. So this is about the third generation of this product. Over the years, I made a few improvements, mostly the codec chip, the Burr Brown codec chip itself got upgraded a few times. And thankfully, if you've ever opened one of these things up, you'll notice that the codec is on a sub-assembly little PC board that plugs into the main board. So when new versions of that chip came along, all we had to do was revise that subassembly, and older units could be updated to take advantage of the newer versions of the Burr Brown IC. And the other cool thing on here, it has a headphone jack on the front, so you can monitor what's being played from the PC. The other thing that's kind of unique about this, since it is intended for legitimate pro audio broadcast applications, is it has a power cord. It has a internal power supply. So the only thing that's being powered by USB is that single Burr Brown chip, which draws maybe 10 or 15 milliamps, nothing. But we have the advantage of 30 volt rails for the analog in and out. So you get tons of headroom, and you don't have to worry about the thing clipping and doing anything weird like that. So anyway, this is not, as I said, this is not really a new product, but I just thought I would give you a quick update on it. The new thing that we did come out with about a month ago is we have a new version of our little headphone amp. The original version was just called the Mini Pod, and the new version is called Mini Pod Max. It's the same size as the old version, same connectors on the back. And I just decided to upgrade the output capability. So by using a newer output circuit, the headphone outputs will produce twice the output voltage they did before. So when you double the voltage, the current doubles, so your output power actually goes up by a factor of 4. And I noticed this when I was using one of the older ones to listen to some live music stuff I recorded years ago, and I noticed it was right on the edge of getting clipped, especially at higher output levels. So I decided, well, let's kick this thing up a couple of notches and make it have an extra 6 dB of headroom, and that's just about what it needed to be able to reproduce live music without any chance of clipping. And the other thing I did was got rid of electrolytic capacitors in the audio path. So there's only one film cap from input to output. So the low end goes down to, I don't know, 5 hertz or something. So it's really, really solid. And in case you didn't know, the cool thing about mini pods is they've got, I don't know if you can see it too well. There's in and out on 1/4 inch, but there's two. There we go. There's two RJ45s, and those are for linking multiple units together. So if you have like a conference room or a studio that's got a half a dozen mics positions and everybody wants to have their own headphones, you can put 6 or 8 or 10 of these things in the studio and just link them, daisy chain them with Cat5. Feed audio into the first one and feed power into the first one, and then audio and power will get distributed down the whole system. So you only need one power supply and you don't need a DA and all that other kind of thing. You just daisy chain as many of these as you need.
What is
And
the
so,
section here where it's showing different audio to different ones?
yeah, you have, there's the option. Most people will just have the same audio sent to all units, but you might have a situation where you need um, different audio going to some units. And you can do that. On the inside of the unit, there's jumpers that you can move over that will remove the audio from the bus audio on the Cat5 and let you feed different audio in via the 1/4 inch jacks onto that unit. So you can configure them however you need them, either completely bust or completely independent or any combination of the two. So just gives you more options for installing them. If you're just using maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of these things, you can power them with the wall wart, little connector back there on the side. The wall wart will work. If you got a big system where you're running 10 or 12 of them, we have a thing called a power pod, which is the same size as this, but it's a little more beefy power supply with better regulation, and it'll just give you better performance and no chance of hum or noise getting in there. So there's a couple of ways to power them. So that's kind of what's new. I have to admit, I've been a little lazy lately. As you probably know, the last year especially, studio installations have come to a screeching halt, and nothing really has been going on. So I didn't do very much in the way of new products. This was kind of a real easy way to get a new product out there without too much hassle. Hopefully things will pick up in the next 6 months. We'll see what happens. So that's what's kind of new from my end here in Southern California.
Very interesting. And uh, I'm sure, well, maybe there's some questions here from folks.
Yeah.
We have almost 2 dozen on YouTube as well as our bunch on Zoom. Uh, will you be at NAB, Hank?
I'm not sure. maybe. If I'm there, I'll probably hang out at the BGS booth. It's a little up in the air. We'll see what happens.
The NAB show is not quite the same as it used to be.
Well, it's not even close. I mean, we used to have 120,000 attendance, and it's about half of that now. And it's even the reduction of radio engineering people is even more severe than that because, well, just because of what radio is going through these days. So that's why I'm kind of on the fence about going, but we'll see. If things pick up a little bit in a few months, I'll probably be there.
One thing I've noticed in talking to different manufacturers is that there seem to be more uh, people at the show that were interested in actually buying instead of just kicking tires. And uh, because of that, less people on the floor, you had a better chance of getting to the manufacturer and asking questions and
Yeah,
demonstrations.
yeah, that could be, with everybody cutting back, especially radio. Um, my feeling is, yeah, the radio people that are there are there to be serious about, and looking at equipment for uh, purchases coming up fairly soon, because the stations are not going to spend the money to send guys to the show unless they have a real good reason.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I heard from the BGS guys, because that's where I was last year. So we'll see. It's still probably worthwhile going.
Yeah. Well, we just wanted to make sure that folks knew it was still coming. Uh,
Yeah,
it's probably still going to be out that West Hall, and I hope that
yeah,
some better way of getting people to and fro than the long walk.
yeah, yeah. And they've got the underground Tesla thing. That's pretty cool, and it's really quick as long as you're going to and from where it goes to and from.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll
You
see.
have to walk out to that, then you have to walk back to the hall. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I took it a couple of times. It's pretty interesting.
yeah, I thought so. Quiet, very quiet, very quiet. Anyone have
Yep.
questions for Hank about the two products he showed, or anything else that he's doing? Or is there a something that you think you need for your studio that doesn't happen to be made yet?
Hank, I thought I'd let you know that I finally obtained two of your backups.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I finally got those through Broadcaster General Store. It came very quickly, and they're installed down at the water company, doing their job there, backing up the computer for the SCADA system. So if there's a failure, if your units fail, we're going to have water overflowing from reservoirs, and I'll get flooded here and all that. But frankly, I'm not worried about that. I think your backup units are well made, and I think they're doing a great job there to keep the SCADA system going for the local water company.
Good, thank you. Well, if you get up out of bed and the first thing you feel are wet feet, then
Yeah, I'll
you
say, oh, got to call Hank.
good.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, after I retired, I wound up on the board of directors of our local water company here, and we had some problems with our SCADA system and overflowing reservoirs, and I saw a good need for Hank's products, so we went through some delay getting them, but finally did it, and they're working great to keep the water flowing where it should.
Good to hear. Glad to hear that.
Very good. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning, and that is that Broadcast Depot, who are graciously providing some support for our meetings together here, and Mary Schnelly, who's probably hiding or she's on the phone again. It's hard to tell sometimes. But they're running some specials this week on
Oh,
the Matchbox, aren't you, Mary? Mary,
I
Mary.
think so. I think so. I have to apologize. I have a really bad cold today, so I sound very bad.
Well, I won't say very bad, but I understand. I just got over it myself.
Yeah, it's going around.
but there was something Tim sent out about the USB Matchbox and I think the headphone app that you have on special this week.
Yeah.
So if you need a Matchbox, a USB Matchbox, a headphone amp, or anything else that comes from Henry Engineering, check with Mary, and she will just, she'll blow her nose and suck it up, and she'll make a good deal for you.
Thank you, Mary.
And more of a general interest question. If you go to Hank, to your website, you look towards the back. There's a whole list of equipment you no longer make, but the manuals or the schematics for it are still available. I'm just curious, as a general interest, as a manufacturer, what determines when it's time, or actually, I'm curious why it's time to retire a given product.
Oh, it's just based on demand. Um, there's a point where there's not enough sales of a particular product to to make it viable, because if demand drops down to where we're only building a low quantity, that causes our production costs to just go through the roof. The the most expensive component of any of our products is the metal box, because this is not an off-the-shelf product. It's this metal work, the chassis and the top cover. Each one is made for each product. Well, the top covers are all the same for all the products, but the chassis is different for each product. And when you make fewer than 50 of those things, the cost for metal fabrication and painting and silk screening just goes astronomical. And then at that point, we just kind of have to pull the plug on the product. Unfortunately, there's a lot of prefabbed chassis out there that manufacturers can use, but they're always made of aluminum. And that's a problem, because all of our products are AC powered. So the power supply is inside here, and which means sitting over at one end, there's a power transformer. And if you have, 3 of these things mounted in a rack shelf, and you've got a power transformer here and another unit right here, you'll have hum transfer, you'll have noise transfer from the magnetic field of the transformer if it was a steel, if it was an aluminum chassis. That's why we make our chassis out of steel. The thickness of the side here is 50 thousandths, 050. So when you put 2 units together, that gives you a solid 1/10 of an inch of steel, which provides really good shielding for the transformer. The downside of that is that steel chassis are expensive to make. So it all comes down to demand, sales potential versus cost, and all that sort of thing. So that's really what it comes down to.
Do you make rack mount options for these?
Yeah, there's a rack shelf. I can go, let me go get one. It'll just take a sec. Hold on a sec.
While Hank is out rooting through his warehouse to bring us something to show, just to mention, next week we're going to have sort of a general, let's get together and how I got into broadcasting, or why I'm in broadcasting in the first place, chat. And I think that'll be pretty interesting to find out a little more about each one of us and how we can share our stories of the joys and the frustrations that we have in this industry.
Yeah, here's the rack shelf. You'll see on the back a bunch of all these little holes there.
Mm-hmm.
So each one of these things is a third of a rack width, measures about 6 inches, a little under 6 inches. And on the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but there's 4 tapped holes on the bottom of each unit. So the units just mount in just like that with screws. And so you can put 3 units across. And when you get the rack shelf, we also include 2 of these little, what I call filler panels. So if you're only mounting 1 or 2 units and you don't want to have a big hole in the middle, then this filler panel fills in the empty space. It's also kind of cool if you need to add some custom, switches or jacks or connectors or whatever. You can always drill a hole in this and mount your own stuff in here. So that's the rack mount kit, and each rack mount will accommodate 3 of our standard third of a rack width products.
Very nice. Anyone else have a question for Hank? I see your hand, John.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
All right, I've got a question about the power tracker.
Oh, okay.
I recently got a new transmitter that doesn't have built-in metering for power.
Hmm.
And I thought the power tracker might be a good solution, tie into the remote control. Do you have an option where it can have a display that can call up the voltage just displayed in there when you're at the site without having to connect to the remote?
Oh, no. It just gives you a proportional DC output that you feed into your remote control,
Right.
but there's no display on the unit itself.
Okay.
But one unit will handle all 3 phases of your incoming power, and you can set it for whatever your voltage level is, 120 up to 480.
Yep. In our case, it's 208Y120. But I
Yeah.
do have a question that, is it possible to use 6 metering channels and do phase to phase, but being driven by the same outputs as phase to ground?
Oh, let me think. Yeah, what it reads is, yeah, I think you could do that, because if you configure it for delta, that's what it's looking at, phase to phase, because with delta there's no neutral. So if you had 2 units, you'd set one up normally for 3-phase Y, and set the second unit up, and fake it out, make it look like it's being connected to a delta service, and then yes, then it will look at phase to phase. So you just need two units need to have 6 outputs.
Ah, okay. Didn't know if it was possible to do all of that with the samples being outputted by a single unit. Sounds like probably not, because of
Not
the
really,
why.
not really, because the samples are DC, so you're not going to get the no phase difference between them. So, but if you set it up for delta, a second unit, then you'll get a DC output that's proportional to the phase to phase voltage, because that's how the delta units are reading.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Any other questions or whatever? It's quiet on the Western Front.
Well, again, we come back to this concept. It's something that is very simple, and therefore there's not a lot of questions about it, but at the same time, thought goes into it. I know you have the product that switches UPSs. And I think that's worth a mention at this moment.
Yeah, that's what Marv was talking about, the backups that I think we talked about that on the last time I was here. That's our gadget for bypassing a UPS that's getting flaky, which they do when the batteries start to get weak. So that lets you bypass the UPS and keep all your gear alive while you change the batteries or take the thing out and replace it or do whatever you got to do. It'll keep your rack full of equipment up and operating without having to pull the plug on everything. So yeah, that's actually been a really popular product. We've probably shipped about 400 of those things in the last few years. So that they work really well.
Very good. And that's something that most people don't think about, because if they think about having a UPS, then something happens down the road where the UPS is starting to
Yeah,
fail, the battery, and either
yeah,
you completely disconnect and go off, or something like this where you can switch.
yeah, right. You can make it switch automatically, which is how it's normally used. And the nice thing about the way it works is um, when the UPS comes back on, there's a delay in there that you can program. So it won't switch back to UPS power until it confirms that the UPS output is on and stable and not doing anything weird. And you can set that time delay for anything from around like 10 seconds out to 15 minutes. Because a lot of times when a UPS gets flaky, it'll drop off, then it'll come back on, and then it'll drop off and come back on and back and forth and, on and off, on and off. And that's what starts to really cause problems, as you can imagine. So the way the thing works is when if it's gone to the bypass mode, fail safe, and you're on direct line power, um, after you've fixed your UPS or put in a new battery or whatever, then when you put the whole thing back in the circuit, uh, the UPS voltage will come back up, but it won't switch to UPS mode until it verifies that the voltage is on and it's staying on. And then it'll switch back to a normal UPS mode where the UPS is in the circuit. So we tried to think of everything. You could also force it to bypass if necessary. Sometimes if guys install these up at a transmitter site, and it looks like things are getting weird up there with the UPS, you can via your remote control force the thing to bypass the UPS just to get it out of the circuit completely until you can go up there and see what's going on. So there's various ways it can be implemented, and it's one of those things. I tried to think of the worst case possibility, because that's what usually happens, right?
Yep.
The farther you are away from the transmitter, that's the worst things that happen. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
Hank,
or the other side, where if you now, as I hear what you're saying, running off the UPSs, and there are some that would rather run off regular power and switch to UPS only in an emergency.
That could be. That's sounds like an installation, something to do with the installation of the UPS itself.
yeah, maybe.
Most of them, most of the better grade will run in UPS mode all the time, Um, well, let me think about that for a minute. No, well, they're in a standby mode, so it is running off of line power, grid power, unless that goes away,
Mm-hmm.
which is, pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's got a lot of flexibility for even unusual situations. One of the first sites I ever took care of was in a building that had been it was at the edge of town, and it had a rural electric cooperative into it. And when we came, we installed a transmitter that required three-phase, and we had the city put in a service entrance for three-phase. So we left a backup transmitter on the rural electric cooperative, single phase, and we ran our main transmitter off three-phase from city. But the center equipment rack that needed to be there to run the audio gear and stuff, somebody Rube Goldberg the thing with a couple of contactors and an agastat, so that the center equipment rack would run off either the city power or the rural electric cooperative, whichever one was there. There was no UPS in the building, no batteries, but it had two power companies, and it would choose to keep the remote control and the STL receivers and stuff on whatever it could find. And this sounds like this would do that.
Yeah, it would. You can fake it out. It doesn't. You can call the main three-phase. You can call that your main grid, and you can call the rural city single-phase feed. You can make that into your UPS, and it'll operate the same way.
Yeah. So
that'll
somebody
work.
may have a very strange use for one of those, but the time that I had to repair that thing, it would have been much easier to call you and buy one.
Yeah. Well, now you know.
I had never seen something called an agastat. Matter of fact, I'm not sure if anybody else has either, but it's a hydraulic time delay relay that basically it used air pressure, and that thing would be held in, and if the power failed for more than about 5 minutes, the air would leak out of it and the contactor would go to the other side. So it didn't have a timer. It just had a leaky bellows that would do it for you.
Huh. That sounds like, that does sound like a Rube Goldberg arrangement.
Yeah, it was very weird, but it saved me a few times.
Yeah, good. Any other questions or whatever?
Well, not a question, but a comment. I had a strange experience, but a good one for the backups. We had a visit from our local fire department doing inspections, and there was an inspector trainee, and he was in our rack room, and he was taking note of the fact that taking note of a breaker in our panel that was switched to off, and I was getting ready to tell him that it was duly and properly labeled as a spare. But then he operated the lever, except he operated the one just above it and shut off one of our equipment racks.
Oh.
Well, we had a backups. So you heard the screech from the UPS, but the thing instantaneously switched. Thank you.
Oh, good.
End of story.
Glad it saved your bacon.
Yeah, that had all of our STLs on it, as well as some of our distribution amps.
Important stuff.
Indeed so.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Hank, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and show off your goodies. And, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. You could spend half a day on your website.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation, and glad to be able to come by now and then and chit chat a bit and let you know what's going on. And thank you to everybody for all your support all these years. Next year, let's see, 2025. So it'll be the 43rd year of Henry Engineering, if you can imagine that. I certainly can't. I can't be that old. But thanks again, and I hope everybody has a great holiday.
Hi, Hank. Where does the Henry come from?
That's my name. My legal name is Henry.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad's name was also Henry. So when I was a kid, I always went by Hank instead of Henry. That way we could tell who mom was screaming at, whether it was me or dad. So there you go.
And now you know.
Now you know. Okay,
Let's
I'll scoot out of here. Let you guys keep on going. And have a good holiday, everybody.
thank you. Stay in touch.
Hey, will do. Take care.